They say you should never reveal all your cards at once. For 8 long years, I've lived by that rule, letting everyone think I was a struggling nobody. Even my wife, Sophia, the woman I thought I loved, had no idea who I really was. And that night, sitting on the corner of our leather sectional, sipping a glass of water like I didn't have a care in the world, I let them laugh. Sophia, with her flawless curls and that gleaming pearl necklace I bought her, was in her element. She loved playing hostess, especially to her circle of friends. Well, I called them her entourage. They were the type who'd wear designer dresses to a backyard barbecue just to outshine one another. And tonight, they'd found their entertainment for the evening. Me, Daniel, sweetheart, why don't you tell them about your latest job hunt? Sophia cooed, her tone syrupy sweet, but laced with the kind of venom only she could muster. The room erupted in laughter before I could even open my mouth. It wasn't the first time she'd done this, used me as the punchline to her jokes, but tonight she was really going for it. Maybe the new champagne had given her courage. Her best friend, Melissa, chimed in next. Honestly, Sophia, you're so patient. If my husband couldn't hold a steady job, I don't know what I'd do. I mean, it's not like Daniel's even trying, right? She gave me a look that could cut glass, and I forced a weak smile. That's the thing about playing a role. You have to commit, even when it stings. Inside, I wanted to laugh in their faces, to tell Melissa that her position as head of marketing was courtesy of me. I could see the resignation letter sitting in my drafts folder with her name on it. But I didn't. Not yet. Sophia leaned back, swirling her wine. Oh, Melissa, don't be too hard on him. At least he knows his way around the kitchen. The man makes a mean spaghetti, and someone has to do the dishes around here. More laughter. Even the husbands joined in, their chuckles bouncing off the vaulted ceilings of the house I paid for. The house they thought belonged to Sophia, courtesy of her supposed financial contributions. Funny how none of them noticed the cracks in her story. Did they think her part-time charity work funded this marble-floored palace? Or the luxury cars parked out front? No, but they believed what they wanted to believe because it was easier. And I let them. Sophia wasn't done yet, though. Remember that one time Daniel thought he could be a consultant? Oh, darling, you spent months preparing for that interview, didn't you? What was the company called again? Oh, right, Summit Innovations. They didn't even call him back? She erupted into laughter, clutching her sides like it was the funniest thing she'd ever heard. That one hit close. She didn't know it, but that interview wasn't what she thought. It had been my routine quarterly check-in, an undercover review to ensure my managers were doing their jobs. I sat across the table from my own hiring team that day, silently judging them while they judged me. It was my way of keeping things in check. And now, my own wife had turned that into a joke. The rest of the night passed in a blur of cruel remarks, shared glances, and clinking glasses. They didn't see the way my grip tightened around my drink or notice the fire building behind my calm expression. That's the funny thing about people like them. They assume the quiet ones are weak. But weakness isn't silence. Weakness is thinking your throne is secure when it's built on lies. Eventually, Sophia waved me off to the kitchen, saying, "Be a dear and get us another bottle, won't you?" I stood and did as she asked, my face a mask of quiet submission. But as I walked away, I caught the words she whispered to Melissa. Honestly, I don't know how much longer I can do this. A man without ambition is just embarrassing. Embarrassing. That's what she called me. I felt the heat rising in my chest, but I swallowed it down. That night wasn't about reacting. It was about remembering. Every word they said, every laugh they shared, was fuel for what was to come. As I stood in the kitchen, uncorking another bottle of champagne I'd bought, I glanced at the clock. It was 9:47 p.m. Less than 12 hours until the board meeting. Less than 12 hours until their world came crashing down. Let them laugh tonight, I thought, because tomorrow, none of them would have anything to laugh about. I returned to the living room, placing the bottle on the coffee table like a dutiful husband. Sophia barely acknowledged me, too busy telling the room about her latest spa day. I sat back down, taking my place in the corner, invisible and insignificant in their eyes. But inside, I was smiling. Let them mock me. Let them think I'm nothing. Because when the clock struck 9 the next morning, they'd learn the truth. The man they belittled wasn't just their equal. He was their boss. It wasn't the first time Sophia had embarrassed me in front of her friends, but this night was a masterpiece of cruelty. She wasn't just hosting. She was putting on a show. Every smile, every joke, every exaggerated story was designed to put her on a pedestal and me 6 feet under. "Melissa," she began, swirling her wine like she was born holding a glass of vintage. "You should have seen Daniel last month. He came home so excited. He thought he'd found the perfect job listing." She leaned forward like she was sharing some scandalous secret. "He spent 3 hours on the application, pouring his heart and soul into it. And guess what?" She paused, grinning like a Cheshire cat. "They didn't even bother sending him a rejection email." The room erupted in laughter. I sat there, my face a carefully composed mask, nodding along like I was part of the joke. Inside, I was calculating. Every laugh, every insult. This wasn't just about me anymore. Sophia's friends were executives, middle management, and department heads at my company. They were the very people who prided themselves on being at the top, blind to the fact that their careers hung on the decisions of the man they were mocking. Sophia was relentless. She crossed her legs, flashing her Louboutins, the ones I bought, and gestured dramatically. "Honestly, I've tried everything to help him, you know? I even suggested he try barista work at the cafe down the street. At least he'd get tips." More laughter. Even the husbands joined in, clinking their glasses in agreement. For a moment, I considered saying something. I could have told them that cafe was one of many businesses I'd acquired under a shell company, that the very job she mocked was in a building I owned. But I stayed quiet. Timing was everything, and tonight wasn't the night to shatter their illusions. Sophia's smile widened as she turned her attention back to me. "What do you think, Daniel? Maybe you should listen to me for once." Her tone dripped with condescension, as if I were a child who'd wandered into an adult conversation. I shrugged, keeping my voice calm. "Maybe you're right. I'll look into it." She wasn't expecting that. I could see it in her eyes. She thrived on conflict, loved it when I pushed back, just enough to make myself look defensive. But giving her nothing? That threw her off. Still, she recovered quickly, tossing her hair over her shoulder like a queen dismissing a servant. "Good. It's about time." I sipped my water, letting her have the last word. Let her believe she'd won. The truth was, she'd been losing for years. She just didn't know it yet. As the night wore on, Sophia's arrogance only grew. She bragged about her charity work, making sure everyone knew she was the backbone of the family. "It's not easy being the only breadwinner," she said, her voice heavy with false humility. "But someone has to keep the lights on, right?" It took every ounce of restraint not to laugh out loud. The mortgage? Paid off years ago. The cars? Paid in full. Every single luxury she flaunted to her friends was courtesy of my money, funneled through accounts she didn't even know existed. But to her, I was just the man who couldn't land a job. The irony was almost too good. Sophia's friend, Angela, leaned forward, placing a manicured hand on Sophia's knee. "Honestly, babe, you're a saint for putting up with it. If my husband were that useless, I'd have left him ages ago." Sophia sighed dramatically, as if she were carrying the weight of the world. "Oh, believe me, I've thought about it. But then I remind myself, I married for love, not ambition." I clenched my jaw, forcing a smile. Love? Was that what she called it? Because from where I stood, her love looked a lot like opportunism. She'd married me thinking I was a stepping stone, a man she could mold into the kind of success she could take credit for. But when I didn't fit the mold, she turned me into a project. Something to fix, or worse, pity. The night dragged on, each conversation more insufferable than the last. They talked about luxury vacations, designer brands, and the importance of networking. I sat there, nodding along, my presence barely acknowledged unless it was to set up the next joke at my expense. "Daniel, why don't you grab us another bottle of champagne?" Sophia asked sweetly, her smile as sharp as a blade. "You know where it is, right? In the wine fridge I bought?" The room erupted into another round of laughter. I stood, nodding politely, and headed to the kitchen. My fists clenched as I reached for the bottle, but I forced myself to breathe. This wasn't the time to react. This was the time to plan. As I uncorked the champagne, I glanced at the clock. It was almost 10 p.m. In less than 12 hours, the same people who mocked me tonight would walk into my office, completely unaware that their fates were already sealed. Sophia would wake up in a house she no longer controlled, her circle of friends decimated. And I'd finally step out of the shadows. I returned to the living room, placing the champagne on the table without a word. Sophia didn't even look at me. She was too busy holding court, basking in the glow of her imagined superiority. For a moment, I considered walking away, heading upstairs, and letting them have their fun. But no, I stayed. I watched. I listened. Every word, every insult, every smug laugh was another nail in the coffin of their delusions. They thought they were untouchable. They thought I was powerless. But tomorrow, they'd learn the truth. The man they underestimated wasn't just their equal. He was their boss. And he was done playing nice. They didn't know it, but every laugh, every insult, every sideways glance they threw my way that night was fuel for what I had been preparing for years. The power I held wasn't in flashy displays or loud declarations. It was in patience, in knowing exactly when to strike. I learned that lesson the hard way, long before I ever met Sophia. 12 years ago, I was a different man. Back then, I didn't know what it felt like to be underestimated. I was young, ambitious, and full of hope. My father ran a small electronics business, a family legacy he poured everything into. We weren't wealthy, but we were proud. That pride crumbled the day corporate raiders came in, bought the business for pennies, and dismantled it overnight. I'll never forget the look on my father's face when they shut the doors for good. It wasn't just a business they took, it was his life's work. That moment shaped me. I swore I'd never let anyone take from me what they took from my father. I would build something unshakable, something untouchable. And I did. Summit Innovations wasn't born in a boardroom. It was born in my tiny apartment, where I worked around the clock, teaching myself coding, business strategy, and finance. I started with small contracts, fixing software bugs for local companies, and used every dollar I earned to reinvest in my dream. By the time I was 28, Summit was growing faster than I could have imagined. By 30, it was a powerhouse. And by 35, it was a global leader. But success comes with its own challenges. The bigger you get, the more vultures circle. I'd already had 3 relationships implode by the time I met Sophia. Each one ended the same way. They saw my success as a golden ticket, something they could latch onto and ride to an easier life. So, when I met Sophia, I made a choice. I wouldn't let her see the real me. Not yet. When we met, I was in the middle of a corporate acquisition. I just finalized a deal worth millions. But I walked into that charity gala dressed in a suit I'd had for years, and drove a car that wouldn't have looked out of place in a used lot. Sophia caught my eye instantly. She was beautiful, confident, and magnetic. But what stood out most was how she treated me. When she thought I was just a struggling consultant, she was sweet, supportive even. She told me, "You'll find your place, Daniel. Just keep trying." I believed her. I thought maybe, just maybe, she was different. We dated for a year before I proposed. By the time we got married, I thought I'd made the right choice. I moved her into the house she now calls hers, though I didn't tell her I owned it outright. I let her believe we were sharing everything, that we were building a life together. I even transferred money into her account monthly, so she could feel like she was contributing financially. At first, she was kind. But success changes people, or, more accurately, reveals them. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. Sophia's patience turned into criticism. Her kind words became thinly veiled barbs. She started using my lack of ambition as a weapon, first in private arguments, then in front of others. I could have stopped her at any time, but I didn't. Instead, I let her think she was in control. I let her believe she was the reason we had this life. I even let her spend money recklessly, knowing every dollar she flaunted came from my hard work. What she didn't know was that I was always watching. I wasn't just building a company. I was building safeguards. Every shell company, every private account, every legal document was designed to protect what I'd built. Sophia had no idea that every extravagant vacation, Every luxury car, every designer dress was paid for by Summit Innovations, funneled through accounts she couldn't trace. And she definitely didn't know that her friends, her inner circle of so-called high achievers, were my employees. Sophia's best friend, Melissa, was the head of marketing. Angela ran human resources. Even the husbands, with their tailored suits and smug grins, were senior executives, all handpicked by me. They thought they were untouchable, climbing their corporate ladders, making decisions they thought were theirs. But the truth was, every promotion, every project, every so-called achievement they bragged about at dinner parties was orchestrated by me. I didn't just build Summit Innovations. I controlled it. And they were pawns in a game they didn't even know they were playing. As Sophia and her friends mocked me that night, I thought about the files locked in my study upstairs. Surveillance footage of drunken company events where they let their guards down. Expense reports showing their misuse of company funds. Recorded conversations detailing their questionable business strategies. They thought they were invincible, but they didn't realize they were being watched by someone who had planned for this moment for years. Sophia's mocking voice snapped me out of my thoughts. "Daniel, are you even listening?" she said, laughing. "Honestly, I don't know how you expect to get anywhere if you're always daydreaming." I smiled, a small, calculated smile. "You're right," I said. "I should focus more." She nodded, satisfied, not realizing how true those words were. Because while she saw me as the failure in the room, I was the one holding all the power. And tomorrow, when I walked into my own company as more than just Sophia's husband, the illusion she had built would crumble. The truth about power is simple. It's not about how loudly you speak or how much you show off. Real power is quiet. It's patient. It's waiting for the exact moment when the people who underestimate you are at their most arrogant, and then showing them who you truly are. That night, as I carried another bottle of champagne into the living room, I knew I had reached my limit. The humiliation, the laughter, the dismissive looks, it had all added up over the years. But Sophia's final jab, the one she delivered with a smug grin while her friends clinked glasses, was the spark that lit the fuse. "Honestly, I don't know how much longer I can carry this marriage," she said, her voice loud enough to cut through the laughter. "I mean, I love him, but love doesn't pay the bills. I feel like I'm raising a grown child, not married to a man." Her friends gasped, not in shock but in mock sympathy. "You're so strong," Melissa said, placing a hand on Sophia's arm. "I don't know how you do it." "I keep telling her she deserves better," Angela added. "Someone ambitious. Someone who can match her energy." I paused in the doorway, bottle in hand, listening to the chorus of agreement. My grip tightened on the neck of the champagne. I'd heard enough. Every word, every insult, every patronizing comment, they were drilling into me, but not in the way they intended. Each jab didn't weaken me. It fortified me. I was done playing the role of the defeated husband. Tomorrow, I would end this charade. "Daniel, are you just going to stand there?" Sophia snapped, her tone sharp and impatient. "Bring it here already." I forced a smile, walking over and placing the champagne on the coffee table. "Sorry about that," I said softly, keeping my voice even. "Didn't mean to keep you waiting." "Of course you didn't," she said, barely looking at me. "You never do." That was it. I straightened up, looking around the room at the people who had spent the entire evening tearing me down. None of them met my eyes. They didn't need to. To them, I was invisible, unworthy of acknowledgement. But tomorrow, they'd be looking at me, really looking at me, for the first time. "I'm going upstairs," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Big day tomorrow." Sophia didn't even glance at me. "Good luck with that," she said, already turning back to Melissa. "Maybe this time he'll land something." The words hit like a slap, but I didn't let it show. I walked upstairs to the study, closing the door softly behind me. The sound of their laughter followed me, but I blocked it out. I had more important things to focus on. Inside the study, I locked the door and sat at my desk, taking a deep breath. The calm facade I had worn all night faded away, replaced by the cold determination that had driven me for years. I opened the hidden panel behind the bookshelf, revealing my secure workspace. 3 monitors lit up, displaying live feeds from the company, financial reports, and the personal files I gathered on Sophia and her friends. I started with Melissa, head of marketing. She had been siphoning funds from the department for years, disguising it as event planning expenses. The receipts in my files told a different story. Lavish vacations, personal shopping sprees, even a down payment on a car. It was all documented, every dollar accounted for. Angela was next. As head of HR, she had covered for executives who violated company policies, sweeping harassment complaints under the rug. Her emails, flagged by my team, were filled with thinly veiled threats to employees who dared to speak up. The husbands weren't any better. Greg, the VP of sales, had inflated quarterly figures to boost his bonuses. Scott, in operations, had been leaking proprietary information to competitors. And they all thought they were untouchable. And then there was Sophia, my wife, the woman who claimed to carry our marriage. She didn't work for the company directly, but she had benefited from it more than anyone. She had used my money to fund her image as a successful socialite, hosting charity events and galas, all while belittling me to anyone who would listen. But the part that stung the most was her betrayal. I had the evidence in front of me, messages exchanged with another man, flirtations at first, then full-blown plans for weekends away. She thought I didn't know. She thought I was too blind, too weak to see what was happening right under my nose. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. The weight of everything, the lies, the manipulation, the mockery, it should have crushed me. But instead, I felt a sense of clarity. I wasn't angry. Anger was too simple, too fleeting. What I felt was purpose. Tomorrow wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. It was about taking back what was mine, about reclaiming the life and the company I had built from nothing. Sophia and her friends had spent years tearing others down, using their positions of power to enrich themselves at the expense of those beneath them. They thought they were untouchable, that their titles and connections made them invincible. But they were wrong. So very wrong. I reached for my phone, sending a message to Sarah, my most trusted executive. Everything is in place for tomorrow. Be ready. Her reply came within seconds. All set? They won't see it coming. I closed the hidden panel and leaned back, the faint hum of the monitors the only sound in the room. Downstairs, I could still hear the laughter, the clinking glasses, the sound of their arrogance echoing through the house. But it didn't bother me anymore. Let them laugh. Let them think they'd won. Because tomorrow, the laughing would stop. As I sat there, I thought about my father, about the lessons he'd taught me after his business was destroyed. Success, he'd said, isn't about being loud. It's about being patient. It's about waiting for the right moment to act. And that moment was finally here. I smiled to myself, the calm before the storm settling over me. By this time tomorrow, Sophia and her friends wouldn't just see me differently. They'd finally see the truth. The man they mocked wasn't a failure. He wasn't a joke. He was their boss. The morning of the reckoning began like any other, but for me, it was far from ordinary. The house was eerily quiet as I dressed in a tailored navy suit, one of the few indulgences I kept tucked away for occasions like this. Sophia was still asleep, her careless confidence evident in the way she sprawled across the bed, oblivious to what was coming. For years, I'd let her believe she was in control, but today, I was taking it all back. At exactly 6 a.m., I left the house, stepping into a black town car waiting outside. My driver, Charles, nodded as I slid into the back seat. He didn't ask questions. He never did. But there was a flicker of curiosity in his eyes when he noticed my unusually polished demeanor. "To Summit headquarters," I said simply. He nodded and pulled away, the hum of the engine steadying my nerves. My phone buzzed with a message from Sarah, my most trusted executive and one of the few people who knew the truth about me. "Sarah, boardroom ready. Security briefed. Documentation finalized." Me, perfect. "Be sure the legal team is on standby." "Sarah, they've been briefed. Good luck." Luck wasn't a factor anymore. Everything had been meticulously planned, every detail accounted for. I leaned back in my seat, watching the city wake up around me. It was almost poetic, the world going about its business, unaware that, in a few hours, 5 people's lives would be irreversibly changed. When I arrived at the office, I entered through the private service entrance. It was one of many perks that came with being the CEO of Summit Innovations, though no one had ever seen me use it. That's how I liked it. Staying in the shadows, observing from a distance, letting my carefully chosen executives think they were running the show. But today, I wasn't staying in the shadows. Sarah was waiting for me in the security office. She handed me a visitor's badge with a faint smirk. Angela Martinez, it read, the fake name I used whenever I needed to go undercover within my own company. Everything is set, she said, motioning to the monitors displaying live feeds from various parts of the building. Your wife's friends are already here. Morning meetings are underway. I glanced at the screens, watching as Melissa, Angela, Greg, and Scott arrived one by one, laughing and chatting as if it were just another day. They had no idea what awaited them. Make sure the security team knows not to intervene unless instructed, I said. I don't want any disruptions. Sarah nodded. Understood. What about your wife? Sophia. My stomach tightened at the thought of her. She wasn't part of the corporate takedown, not directly. But what I had planned for her was just as thorough. She'll know soon enough, I said, brushing off the thought. Focus on the task at hand. At precisely 8:45 a.m., I took my position in the lobby. Dressed in my unremarkable disguise, I watched as the day's players arrived. Melissa breezed in first, her head held high, barking orders into her phone. Angela followed closely behind, pausing to greet the receptionist with a hollow smile. Greg and Scott arrived together, laughing about a round of golf they'd played the weekend before. They didn't notice me sitting there, flipping through a copy of Summit's annual report like a nervous job candidate. That was the beauty of staying invisible. They never looked twice. At 9 a.m. sharp, I made my way to the HR floor for my interview. It was a charade, of course, a test of how deeply the rot had spread. I wanted to see firsthand how my own hiring process had been corrupted under their leadership. Thomas, the HR representative, greeted me with a thin smile, clearly disinterested. This will be a quick assessment, he said, leading me into a small conference room. Just a few basic skills tests and a short interview. The skills test was almost laughable in its simplicity. I made intentional errors, fumbling with questions I could have answered in my sleep. Through the glass walls, I saw Melissa walking by, glancing into the room with a look of mild disdain. She didn't recognize me, of course. To her, I was just another nobody wasting her company's time. Thomas reviewed my work with a barely concealed smirk. Well, he said, his tone condescending, this is interesting. Let's move on to the interview. The panel interview was worse. 3 middle managers sat across from me, their expressions dripping with boredom. They fired off generic questions, barely listening to my answers. At one point, one of them leaned back in his chair and checked his phone mid-sentence. By the time it ended, I had more than enough evidence. The culture they had cultivated was rotten to its core, dismissive, arrogant, and completely detached from the values Summit Innovations was built on. At 10:15 a.m., I made my way to the executive conference room. It was time for the main event. Through the partially open door, I could hear them laughing, their voices carrying the same smug tone I'd endured the night before. You should have seen her face during the interview, Melissa was saying. She looked like she hadn't touched a computer in years. Oh, that's classic, Angela replied, her voice thick with amusement. No wonder HR keeps rejecting people. Where do these applicants even come from? My hand tightened on the doorknob, but I didn't hesitate. I stepped into the room, letting the door close behind me with a soft click. Their laughter died instantly as they turned to face me. I could see the confusion in their eyes, the flicker of recognition as they tried to place me. Actually, I said, my voice steady and deliberate. I think it's time we had a real conversation. Melissa blinked, her brow furrowing. Who are you, and what are you doing here? I smiled, taking a seat at the head of the table, the seat that had always been mine. I'm Daniel Carter, I said, CEO of Summit Innovations. And as of this morning, your boss. The room fell silent, their faces a mix of shock, disbelief, and fear. I leaned back in my chair, letting the weight of my words sink in. Let's begin. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioning. Melissa's confident smirk faltered first, giving way to confusion and then panic. Angela looked as if she'd seen a ghost, while Greg and Scott sat frozen, their bravado evaporating as realization crept in. I let the tension build, savoring the moment. They didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or beg for forgiveness. Melissa recovered first, or at least tried to. "Is this some kind of joke?" she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You? The CEO? That's impossible." "Impossible?" I leaned forward, folding my hands on the table. "Melissa, you've worked at this company for 6 years, and in all that time, you've never thought to question who signs your paychecks. You never bothered to wonder who approved your promotions or overlooked your creative accounting practices. But let me assure you, it's not only possible, it's the truth." I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen. Instantly, the monitors on the walls flickered to life, displaying Summit Innovations' original incorporation documents. There, in bold print, was my name, Daniel Carter, founder and CEO. Beneath it was my photo, a younger version of me, smiling confidently. The same man who now sat at the head of the table, watching their world crumble. "I built this company from the ground up," I said, my voice steady but sharp. "Long before any of you were here. Every policy, every division, every success you've taken credit for, it all started with me." Angela's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. But you're," she stammered, struggling to find the words. "A nobody?" I finished for her. "A man who couldn't even land an entry-level position? That's what you all thought, isn't it? That I was just Sophia's failure of a husband, clinging to the scraps of her so-called success." Greg finally found his voice, though it was shaky at best. This has to be a mistake. There's no way you've been running things. We would have known." "Would you?" I raised an eyebrow, tapping my phone again. The monitors now displayed a series of emails, financial reports, and surveillance footage. Each file was damning, a testament to their years of misconduct. "You were too busy inflating sales figures, covering up harassment complaints, and funneling company money into your personal accounts to notice who was really in charge." Scott, usually the loudest of the group, sat pale and silent. I turned my attention to him. "Scott, tell me, how's your golf game? Still playing on company time? Using the Summit corporate card to cover your rounds?" His jaw dropped, but no words came out. "And Greg," I continued, turning to the man next to him, "those quarterly sales bonuses you've been bragging about at every dinner party? They're based on fraudulent reports. I have every fabricated number right here." I gestured to the monitors. "Would you like me to show the board?" Greg slumped in his chair, his hands covering his face. Angela tried a different tactic. "Look, Daniel, Mr. Carter. This has been a misunderstanding. I've always respected you. I mean, the company. And if there's anything we can do to fix this..." I cut her off with a cold smile. "Fix it? Angela, you've spent years burying complaints, silencing employees, and fostering a toxic culture. You didn't respect anything except your own comfort." Melissa, ever the opportunist, leaned forward, her tone pleading. "Daniel, we didn't know. If we'd known, we never would have." "Mocked me?" I said, my voice rising slightly. "Laughed at me? Treated me like dirt in my own house?" I stood, planting my hands firmly on the table. "Ignorance isn't an excuse. You didn't know because you didn't care to know. You thought I was beneath you. And now, you'll face the consequences." I tapped my phone one last time, and the screen behind me changed again. This time, it displayed their termination letters, each one signed and dated. "Effective immediately, you're all fired. Your access to company accounts and systems has been revoked. Security is waiting outside to escort you off the premises." "No, no, no," Greg muttered, shaking his head. "You can't do this." I locked eyes with him. "I just did." Angela stood abruptly, her chair screeching against the floor. "This is outrageous. We'll sue." You'll what?" I snapped, cutting her off. "Sue me for firing you with cause? For exposing the fraud, the theft, the harassment you've swept under the rug? Be my guest, Angela. But I promise you, I have more evidence than you have excuses. The door opened, and 2 security guards stepped inside. Take them to HR for their exit interviews, I said, my tone icy. Make sure they understand the terms of their severance, or lack thereof. One by one, they stood, their confidence shattered. Melissa glared at me as if her anger could undo everything. Angela looked like she was holding back tears. Greg and Scott shuffled out without a word, their heads hanging low. Just as they reached the door, I called out, "Oh, and one more thing." They turned to face me, hope flickering in their eyes. "Don't bother reaching out to competitors. Your non-compete agreements are still in effect. And trust me, I'll be watching." The guards escorted them out, and the door closed behind them with a satisfying finality. For a moment, the room was silent again. I let out a slow breath, the weight of years lifting off my shoulders. Sarah entered moments later, her tablet in hand. "Well," she said, her tone neutral but her eyes gleaming with satisfaction, "that went about as expected." "Good," I replied, straightening my suit. "Now, let's prepare for the board meeting. There's still work to do." As I walked out of the room, I felt a sense of clarity I hadn't experienced in years. For the first time, I wasn't just the man behind the scenes. I was Daniel Carter, CEO of Summit Innovations, and I had just reminded them all exactly who I was. I don't think anyone truly understands the satisfaction of watching the mighty fall until it's their hand holding the lever. As I walked back to my private office, I replayed the looks on their faces in my mind. Melissa, Angela, Greg, Scott. They thought they were invincible, untouchable, but I'd torn away their illusions in a matter of minutes. And now, it was time for the aftermath. Sarah was already waiting for me when I arrived, her tablet filled with updates and reports. "The termination process is underway," she said, her tone brisk but professional. "HR is processing their files, and security is clearing their offices." Melissa tried to call someone from the marketing team on her way out, but we've already disabled her phone and email access. I nodded, sitting behind my desk. "Good. Make sure all communications are monitored. I don't want any attempts to leak information or contact clients." "Already done," Sarah replied. "And one more thing. Angela demanded to see the board before she left. She claims she's being wrongfully terminated." I smirked, leaning back in my chair. Wrongful termination? Angela covered up harassment cases, manipulated HR records, and created a culture of fear. Let her try to spin that. I doubt the board will be sympathetic. Sarah smiled faintly, a rare crack in her usually stoic demeanor. "I didn't think so, but I figured I'd let you know." By noon, the fallout was well underway. Security cameras showed Melissa pacing the parking lot, shouting into her phone. Greg sat slumped on the curb, staring at the ground. Scott had already left, his face pale and his shoulders hunched as he walked toward his car. Angela, of course, had been escorted out kicking and screaming, her righteous indignation falling on deaf ears. It was a fitting end for people who had spent years wielding their power to tear others down. And the best part? They still didn't fully understand the scope of what I had done. I pulled up my laptop and opened the live feeds from their exit interviews. Each one was being recorded, of course, for legal purposes. Melissa sat across from the HR representative, her voice tight with anger as she tried to negotiate her severance. "This is ridiculous," she said, slamming her hand on the table. "I've been with this company for years. You can't just fire me." The HR representative didn't flinch. "Your termination is for cause," she replied calmly. "Per your contract, you forfeit severance and stock options under these circumstances. The documentation is all here." Melissa's face turned red as she flipped through the file in front of her. "This is absurd. Cause? What cause?" "Fraudulent expense reports," the representative said, her voice steady. "Unauthorized use of company funds. Gross misconduct." Melissa leaned back in her chair, shaking her head. "This isn't over," she muttered. Oh, but it was. Greg's interview was next. He didn't argue as much as Melissa, but his desperation was just as evident. "Look, I know I've made mistakes," he said, his voice low. "But you don't have to do this. I've got a family to support." The HR representative gave him the same calm explanation. "Your termination is for cause. You will not receive severance or stock options. He hung his head, muttering under his breath, "This can't be happening." Angela was the last. True to form, she came in swinging. "This is discrimination," she shouted, pointing a finger at the HR representative. "You can't do this to me. I've done nothing wrong." The representative remained unfazed. "We have extensive documentation of your actions, including emails, recorded conversations, and witness testimonies. You were complicit in covering up harassment complaints and retaliating against employees who came forward. That is grounds for immediate termination." Angela sputtered, her indignation turning into disbelief. I want to speak to Daniel." The representative glanced at the camera, then back at Angela. "Mr. Carter has already approved this termination. The decision is final." By the time their interviews were over, their access had been revoked, their emails archived, and their personal belongings packed up and delivered to their cars. Sarah confirmed the process had gone smoothly. "They're officially out," she said, placing her tablet on my desk. "The office feels lighter already." I smiled. It's amazing how much dead weight can drag a place down. But the day wasn't over yet. There was still one more person who needed to face the consequences: Sophia. At 1:30 p.m., just as I was reviewing the final reports from HR, my phone buzzed. It was Sophia. Her name flashing on the screen brought a mix of emotions: anger, disappointment, and, oddly enough, relief. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. I let it ring for a few seconds before answering. "Hello, Sophia." "Daniel," she snapped, her voice sharp and impatient. "What the hell is going on? Melissa just called me. She said you fired her and half the executive team. Is this some kind of joke?" "No joke," I said calmly. "Melissa, Angela, Greg, and Scott were all terminated this morning. It was a long time coming." There was a beat of silence on the other end of the line. "You can't do that," she said finally, her voice trembling. "They're your employees, my friends. You had no right." "No right?" I leaned back in my chair, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at my lips. "Sophia, I own the company. I have every right." Her sharp intake of breath was almost satisfying. What are you talking about? "For 8 years, I've let you believe I was just some aimless, unemployed husband. But the truth is, I built Summit Innovations from the ground up. Every decision, every success, every dollar you've spent came from me. And now, I've finally taken out the trash." "You lied to me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "No," I said coldly. "You lied to yourself. And now, you're about to see what happens when the truth finally comes out." I hung up, leaving her in stunned silence. There was more to say, much more. But that conversation could wait. For now, I had a company to run. When Sophia stormed into the Summit Innovations headquarters later that afternoon, the receptionist didn't even have time to stop her. She marched past the front desk and headed straight for the executive suite, her heels clicking angrily against the polished floors. I was waiting for her, seated calmly at my desk, reviewing the final files from the day's terminations. The door burst open, and there she was, my wife, looking every bit the picture of indignation. Her perfectly styled hair, her designer handbag swinging in her hand, and the fury in her eyes might have intimidated someone else. "Not me." "Daniel," she said, her voice sharp and demanding. "What in the world is going on?" I didn't look up immediately. I took my time, finishing the last line of a report before closing the folder and setting it neatly on my desk. When I finally met her gaze, I spoke with deliberate calmness. "Good afternoon, Sophia. What brings you here?" "What brings me here?" she repeated, her voice rising. "I just got a call from Melissa, crying hysterically, telling me you fired her, and Angela and Greg and Scott. You've lost your mind." I leaned back in my chair, steepling my fingers. Have I? Or have I finally decided to clean up the mess they've made of my company? Sophia blinked, caught off guard by the words. "Your company?" she scoffed, shaking her head. "What are you talking about? Summit isn't yours." "It is," I said, my voice steady. "It always has been." For a moment, she was silent, the weight of my statement sinking in. Then she laughed, a bitter, disbelieving sound. This is some kind of joke, right? You're trying to, what? Scare me? Humiliate me? I stood, walking around the desk and stopping just a few feet from her. Do you remember the house we live in, Sophia? The one you've always called our home? I paid for it, outright. And the cars, the trips, the charity galas. You thought your part-time work covered all that? No. Every luxury you've ever flaunted was funded by Summit Innovations. My company. Her face paled, and her hand tightened around her handbag. You're lying. Am I? I walked back to my desk and tapped a button on my laptop. The monitor on the wall behind me lit up, displaying the incorporation documents for Summit Innovations, complete with my name as founder and CEO. You've been living off my success for years, Sophia, and while you were busy mocking me, I was busy building an empire. She stared at the screen, her mouth opening and closing as if she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. You lied to me, she finally whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't lie, I said coldly. I let you believe what you wanted to believe. You saw what you wanted to see. A man you could pity, control, and belittle. You never once stopped to question why everything seemed to come so easily, why the bills were always paid, or why your lifestyle never matched what you thought we could afford. You never cared enough to dig deeper. Her eyes filled with tears, not of remorse, but of anger. You humiliated me in front of my friends. You destroyed them. I raised an eyebrow. Destroyed them? No, Sophia. They destroyed themselves. Melissa was stealing from the company. Angela covered up harassment complaints. Greg falsified sales figures, and Scott leaked proprietary information to competitors. They weren't your friends. They were parasites. Just like you. The word hit her like a slap, and for a moment, I thought she might scream. Instead, she straightened her spine, trying to reclaim some shred of dignity. You've gone too far, Daniel, she said, her voice icy. You think you can just humiliate me like this? You'll regret it. I let out a short laugh. Regret it? Sophia, for years, I've endured your mockery, your condescension, and your utter lack of respect. You made me the punchline of your jokes, parading me around as a failure while you basked in a life I built. The only thing I regret is not doing this sooner. Her anger boiled over then. You can't do this to me, she hissed. We're married. I'm entitled to half of everything. I walked back to my desk, opened another folder, and pulled out a stack of papers. I placed them on the table between us and slid them toward her. That's where you're wrong. You signed a prenuptial agreement when we got married. It ensures that everything I built before and during our marriage remains mine. Your entitlement ends today. She stared at the papers, her hands trembling. You're divorcing me, she whispered. I am, I said without hesitation. And before you even think about contesting it, know this. I've already spoken to the best divorce attorneys in the city. None of them will take your case. Your access to the joint account has been revoked, and your spending spree stops now. Her face crumpled as the reality of her situation set in. Daniel, please, she said, her voice breaking. I held up a hand, cutting her off. Save it. Your crocodile tears won't work on me anymore, Sophia. For years, I gave you everything. More than you deserved, and you repaid me with mockery and betrayal. I'm done. She stood there, stunned and silent, as I opened the door. Security will escort you out, I said, motioning to the two guards waiting outside. Take whatever dignity you have left and leave. Daniel, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't mean. Goodbye, Sophia, I said, turning back to my desk. And good luck. You'll need it. As the door closed behind her, I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in years, I was free from her manipulations, her lies, and her cruelty. I had reclaimed my life, my company, and my self-respect. Sophia's downfall wasn't just the end of a toxic marriage. It was the beginning of a new chapter for me. And as I sat back in my chair, watching the sun set over the city skyline, I knew that this was only the start. The day after Sophia's departure, the atmosphere at Summit Innovations was electric. The toxic fog that had lingered for years was gone, replaced by a sense of hope and renewal. As I walked into the office that morning, employees stopped to greet me. Not with the stiff politeness reserved for their supposed CEO's husband, but with genuine smiles and nods of respect. For the first time, they were seeing me for who I truly was, the man who had built this company from nothing. Sarah met me at my office, her ever-present tablet in hand. "We've finalized the reorganization plans," she said, her voice steady but with a hint of excitement. "The departments affected by Melissa, Angela, Greg, and Scott are already seeing improvements. Productivity is up 25% in some areas." "Good," I replied, taking the tablet from her and scanning the data. "What about the employees who left because of them? Any word?" "We've reached out to everyone who filed complaints or resigned due to harassment or discrimination," Sarah said. 12 have already accepted reinstatement offers. The others are considering it. "Make sure they know they'll be walking into a very different environment," I said. "I want them to feel safe here. Valued." Sarah nodded, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Understood." That afternoon, I held an all-hands meeting in the main auditorium, a first for me. For years, I had avoided the spotlight, preferring to work behind the scenes. But now, it was time to step forward and address the people who had kept Summit Innovations running, even under the shadow of corruption. As I stepped onto the stage, the room fell silent. Hundreds of faces turned toward me, their expressions a mix of curiosity and anticipation. I gripped the edges of the podium, taking a moment to steady myself before speaking. "Good afternoon," I began, my voice carrying easily through the microphone. "For those of you who don't know me, my name is Daniel Carter. I'm the founder and CEO of Summit Innovations." A ripple of murmurs ran through the crowd, but I continued. "Over the past several years, I've stayed in the background, observing how this company has grown and changed. And while I've seen incredible talent and innovation, I've also seen things that deeply disappointed me. A culture of fear, favoritism, and dishonesty took root here, and I take responsibility for not addressing it sooner." The room was completely silent now, every pair of eyes fixed on me. "But that ends today," I said firmly. "The people responsible for that culture are gone. And moving forward, this company will be a place where everyone, regardless of their position, feels valued, respected, and empowered." I outlined our new initiatives: anonymous feedback channels, enhanced HR protocols, and mentorship programs for employees who wanted to grow within the company. I spoke about accountability and collaboration, about building a culture of trust and innovation. And when I finished, the room erupted into applause. For the first time in years, I felt proud, not just of what I had built, but of what it was becoming. Over the next few months, the transformation was remarkable. Departments that had been bogged down by inefficiency and favoritism began to thrive. Jennifer, a brilliant programmer who had left after being sidelined by Melissa, returned to lead our new AI division. Under her leadership, we filed 5 patents in 6 months, more than the company had in the past 3 years. The Thompson account, one of our largest clients, doubled their contract with us, citing our new leadership and transparency initiatives as key factors. Other clients followed suit, and our revenue soared. But the most rewarding part wasn't the financial success. It was seeing the employees flourish. People who had once been afraid to speak up now shared ideas openly. Collaboration replaced competition. And for the first time, Summit Innovations felt like the company I had always envisioned. As for Sophia and her friends, their downfall was swift and brutal. The evidence I had gathered against them was airtight, leaving no room for retaliation. Melissa and Angela's reputations were in tatters, their misconduct exposed to every potential employer. Greg and Scott faced lawsuits for fraud and breach of contract, their careers effectively over. Sophia, meanwhile, had retreated into silence. She moved out of the house within a week of our confrontation, her pride too wounded to fight me in court. The divorce was finalized quickly, thanks to the ironclad prenuptial agreement. I later heard she was staying with her sister, trying to piece together a life that didn't revolve around appearances and materialism. For a while, I thought about her often, not with anger, but with a strange sense of relief. In the end, she had done me a favor. Her betrayal had forced me to confront the cracks in my life and take back control. And for that, I was grateful. 6 months after the shakeup, I stood in my office, looking out over the city. The skyline was painted in hues of gold and orange as the sun set, and for the first time in years, I felt at peace. Sarah knocked lightly on the door before stepping in. "Final numbers are in," she said, handing me a report. "Profits are up 60%. Employee satisfaction is at an all-time high, and the mentorship program has a waiting list." I smiled, setting the report down. "It's amazing what people can accomplish when you get rid of the dead weight." Sarah chuckled softly. "There's one more thing," she said. "The press is still asking for an interview. They want to know how you managed to pull off such a perfect transformation." I shook my head. "Let the results speak for themselves. I'm not interested in publicity." She nodded, turning to leave, but paused at the door. "Any regrets?" she asked, her tone softer than usual. I thought about it for a moment. About Sophia's mockery, the betrayal of her friends, and the years I had spent hiding in the shadows. But then I thought about the company we had rebuilt, the people who were thriving, and the future that lay ahead. "No," I said finally. "No regrets. Just lessons." In the end, revenge wasn't about destroying what was broken. It was about rebuilding something better. And as I stood there, watching the city lights flicker on one by one, I knew that Summit Innovations wasn't just a company anymore. It was a symbol of resilience, redemption, and the power of starting over. And I was ready for whatever came next.